Welcome to another edition of Inflection. I am Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo. How are you doing today?
Hi, Brian. I'm great. We got a huge subject here today, NED. NED. Can you explain? Can you give us, some direction here? What is NED? NED.
Okay, yep, this happens to us every single time. No worries, Angelo. When I heard yours, I had to close mine because it was going to do it next. So NED, National Endowment for Democracy. I think the easiest thing to do is to let's go to their website and see what they claim they're up to first and foremost, and then we can walk back from that. So NED, National Endowment for Democracy, supporting freedom around the world. Is that what they're really doing? Let's go to about the National Endowment for Democracy, because let me explain how this always goes. When I tell people that there are agitators in a specific country being funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, the US government, first they'll deny it because they know how bad that sounds. Then the next step is they'll say, okay, maybe it is the NED, but it says on their website that they're promoting democracy. How is that bad? And it also says that it's an independent nonprofit foundation. So it's independent. It's not part of the US government. But on the same About web page for the National Endowment for Democracy, it says it was created by the US government. It says it is funded by US Congress, and it's overseen by the US Congress and the Department of State. So how is that independent? It was created by the US government, it's overseen by the US government. How is it in any way independent of the US government? And if you go to their board of directors, they're all people being drawn in from the US government and from corporations. So right there is already highly problematic. And then after you show people this, they'll say, I don't care. I think the U.S. should take over the whole world. And then they'll leave the debate because there's nothing you can say to that. They're receiving money from the U.S. government. The people on the board of directors are not involved in promoting democracy. It's all about regime change and promoting wars. And then there's no more debate after that. And they get frustrated and then they leave. So, Angelo, what about from your point of view? What do you see? I mean, when you first heard of the NED, when did you first hear about it, and then how did you come to understand what it's actually doing?
I started hearing about NED only 10 years ago, and actually I should have learned about it much earlier. We need to look at NED as just a rebranding of the CIA. Remember, it's very obvious. What the NED is doing openly is what the CIA used to do covertly. And you know how many crimes against humanity the CIA has done, and how many governments, democratically elected government, has been toppled. I want just to tell you just a quote, and this comes from, again, we're taking information that comes from the West, the US State Department and NED. In 1986, NED President Karl Gershman said that the NED was created because it would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. So those words are coming from Gershman, the president of NED. Now he's retired, but it's really important that they had to rebrand it because it looked so bad. So now the question is, everyone that is actually around the world taking money from NED, you are actually working against your country's interest, and you're being a foreign agent.
Yeah.
Another thing is that it's really important, if you look at US national security laws, if you are taking money from for foreign government, you need to announce yourself as being a foreign agent. The thing is that other countries, they need to get their act together by having national security laws that are much tougher, and they need to be aligned with the US. Why don't we have the same national security laws around the world to protect a country's sovereignty? Because again, it's not, you need to have sovereignty if you want to have a democracy. As simple as that.
All really great points, Angelo. And that last point you made, democracy is a process of self-determination. So if everything about your movement in your country is being determined and is dependent on Washington, then you're not involved in democracy at all. You are a vector for foreign interference. Foreign interference involving yourself in another nation's political independence is a violation of the UN Charter, the most basic of all international law. And if people don't believe me, if people think like, well, what the NED is doing is not all that bad, funding groups overseas, promoting democracy, promoting opposition groups, promoting media involved in a nation's internal political affairs, organizing petitions to rewrite a nation's constitution. If people think that's not bad, just ask yourself this: would the US tolerate another nation doing that to them? The answer is no. And this is the ultimate proof that what the US is doing through the National Endowment for Democracy is wrong. The US knows that it's wrong. The US doesn't care. They don't care that other nations are having this done to them, while the US itself would never tolerate it being done to them. Now, Angela, that quote you just referenced to Carl Gershman, this comes from New York Times, Missionaries for Democracy, US Aid for Global Pluralism. Again, like the whole headline makes no sense. Democracy is self-determination. There's no way you can promote self-determination in another country except by keeping your hands off of it. That's the only way you could do it. So this is the exact opposite. It is right down here. They're talking about Carl Gershman. It would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. And that's the whole reason there's a National Endowment for Democracy, so that this taint that comes with taking money from the CIA is rebranded, just as you said, Angela. And that's what that's about. So this is from the New York Times. There's another one, Innocence Abroad, The New World of Spyless Coups. This is from the Washington Post. David Ignatius, 1991. So the Washington Post and the New York Times, they both talk about the CIA right here, how this is what they used to do, and how the National Endowment for Democracy and other fake NGOs have taken over this role. But it's the exact same thing. It's the US deciding who gets to run which country and removing governments that they don't like from power, which is what the CIA had done, and now what the NED does. Anything else you want to add to that, Angela? Because now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. Who actually sits on the board of directors, and are these people interested in democracy?
No, just saying that keep in mind that the NED, CIA, those are all deep state. You have a government that change or every 4 years in the US. It changes constantly. You have midterms elections every 2 years. This is a deep state. It's very powerful, and it doesn't necessarily listen to the democracy. There are many cases where they went against the decision of the government and the Congress. The Contra-Iran affair. You're familiar with that. They were actually selling arms to Iran, which was an enemy, and it was against the Congress and the president. So this is the deep state. It's another level, and this is the it's the informal power, and it's really what leads. Who decides? Alongside with the military-industrial complex and the large, the very influential think tanks.
Yeah, and the think tanks, people don't realize this, but the think tanks is where the actual overall consensus comes from in the United States and in the West in general. It has nothing to do with the people. The people are consumers of what's going on inside the United States, what's going on in Washington. They are consumers. They are told how things are going to be done after it's already long been decided. But let's get into, well, let's do this first, because another thing people will say when you expose that they're taking money from the National Endowment for Democracy. Let's take a look at this. I don't know if anyone has seen this. This link will be in the video description below. Please watch this. It's hilarious, but it's also very revealing. This is a prankster. I think he's from, it's a team from Russia. And somehow they got into this National Endowment for Democracy video conference where Carl Gershman and everyone else, the top of the top leadership of the NED, thought they were talking to the opposition in Belarus, but instead they were actually talking to these Russian pranksters. And this is what the NED does with everyone who is taking money from them. They have these video conferences, and then the people they have them with lie to the people in their country and say, no, they don't tell us what to do. They just give us money. Just give us bags and bags of money every year, and they have no expectations at all whatsoever. But if you watch this, this is definitive proof that that's not true, that they tell you, hey, we're going to get this person into power, and you're going to help us do it, and tell us what you need and we will give it to you. And if they say, well, we want Gucci bags, because that's actually one of the things the pranksters requested, they'll say, I don't know how we can do that, but maybe we could do it in another call. Like, honestly, this is what so it's very important to understand this. The NED is telling these people who take their money what to do. They're not independent at all. That no one is just going to give you money and have no expectation at all on what you're going to do with it, especially the US government. So this is important to understand. Angelo added this link in right before the show. This is from Swiss Policy Research. And I would say it's not a complete list, because a lot of groups, the NED funds, they don't disclose. You have to really dig for it, especially like here in Thailand, in Myanmar, in other countries where it's like very sensitive. They will not disclose it, but it's a good start. So let's see if we could find Thailand just real quick, because I'm in Thailand. Right here. So I've talked about almost all of these, and there's some that are not listed, and some where it's like Union for Civil Liberty gets money from the NED, and then they give it out to a bunch of other groups like Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, which is literally leading the anti-government protests right now. Thai Poor Act gets together groups of people and sends them to protests to build up the number of protesters. So when they say the protesters aren't being funded by the NED, maybe they're not each receiving money, but there are organizers that are funded by the NED, and Thai Poor Act is one of them. Isan Record, Angelo, you were just talking about this, run by this. It was created by two Americans. It was handed over to another white male American, and it's a Thai-based news platform funded by the U.S. government. It's utterly absurd. Angela, do you want to talk about David Struckfest a little bit, real quick?
Well, basically, Rekfus is having an interview with Pravit, who's working with Kasod, which is a pro-US media, that is owned by a billionaire, Thanathorn. And so basically in the discussions, they talk about, NED, and it's just like playing stupid, it's just playing stupid. Oh, yes, I'm getting money from the NED, but it's nothing wrong, Again, this it's important just to remind people it's not about exporting democracy, liberal democracy. There's nothing to do with that. You need to keep in mind that NED is actually toppling democratically elected government. Many examples like Ukraine, 2014 Maidan revolution. It was a democratically elected government. They did it in Bolivia. They did it in Nicaragua, in Venezuela. All around the world. What they're trying to do is either they put a US puppet in place, or even if they don't manage, actually creating chaos, it's a victory for NED. If you can contain a country, and it's the wide. We need to look at the broader imperialistic objective. It's about containing the global South. Containing every country that actually could undermine US hegemony. So you see, it's either US puppet or creating chaos, but it has nothing to do with democracy. And sometimes, no, again, just people need to think for themselves what is good, what is the democratic system they want to have. The democracy, liberal Western style democracy, it's a good fit for the West. So and again, it goes against your UN chart that is saying that actually we should never meddle into others countries' internal affairs. So it's extremely undemocratic. But the thing is that they hijack. See where they're good is that they have this ability, marketing ability, to hijack the names. Words like democracy. Once you hijack that, it's like a patent. And this is when you have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from China. He was saying, well, the US doesn't have the patent on democracy. It's not about I have the patent, I have the solution. And in reality, when you look at how it is working, how is it working in the US, really? When you ask people, how is it working? When only 30% of the people, they support the system. Why would you want to export a failing system? That's a question, really.
Angelo, I'm glad that you said that this is actually this is not promoting democracy. This is a process of containing the global South. We're going to get into that in a minute because the new president of the National Endowment for Democracy, it's no longer Carl Gershman. It's Damon Wilson. He actually literally wrote that in a article for the Atlantic Council, which he was a part of before joining the NED. So I'm so glad you brought that up. I want to get back to this list because they're saying they're promoting democracy, but no, they're promoting organizations that are trying to topple the Thai government and install Western-backed and Western-leaning opposition forces in power. And so Isan Record is run by a white guy from America, and he's promoting separatism in the northeast of Thailand. He says Isan identity, but we know that's a stepping stone toward separatism. Thai Poor Act is helping bolster the numbers at protests. Union for Civil Liberty and Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, which falls under it. They provide free legal service for the protesters and the protest leaders. They promote the protests, and their lawyer, Anand Nampa, literally leads the protests. He's one of the core leaders. Right here, where is it? iLaw, where is it? Right here, Internet Law Reform Dialogue, also known as iLaw. They were organizing a petition for one of the three key demands of the protests, the anti-government protests here in Thailand, rewriting the constitution. So this is a US government-funded organization that wants to rewrite Thailand's constitution. Imagine if it was a Chinese-funded organization trying to rewrite the US constitution. How long would that go on before people ended up in jail or thrown out of the country? And it goes on. Oh, this one right here, Foundation for Community Educational Media. This is actually Prachatai, and this is, they love to do this where they have like 12 different names for one single organization. As a matter of fact, Prachatai, this, and Media Inside Out, right here. And I think it's Thai Volunteer Service. They're all in the same building in Hoi Quang, Bangkok. They're all in the same building. I remember there was a writer for Prachatai who then joined Thanaton's political party, Future Forward. She was one of the founding members, and she was still going to Prachatai, writing articles for them, while also a founding member of this political party. So absolutely no ethics at all. There's a huge conflict of interest. How are you going to objectively cover politics in Thailand if you're a founding member of the opposition party? So it's just complete nonsense. And it's all possible because the U.S. government. Now, I do believe it was iLaw, and I will correct myself if I'm wrong in the comment section afterwards. But I was at a meeting, and I'm pretty sure the guy was from iLaw, and someone in the meeting said, because before I came out as Tony Carlucci, I was in meetings with these people, and he said something like, because someone said, why do you take U.S. government money through the NED? It wasn't even me who said that either, by the way. And he said, well, I have to take U.S. government money because no one in Thailand supports what we're doing. This is like so obvious. Like, if people are not supporting you in your country, then what you're doing is not promoting democracy. You're imposing something foreign that someone from overseas is funding for you to impose on people. So obvious. Now, real quick, the NED has satellite organizations or subsidiaries. USAID is a big one that they do things in tandem with. We'll talk about that in another episode. There's also the Solidarity Center, which co-ops or creates fake labor unions. They're not real labor unions because they're being organized and funded by the people you're supposed to organize unions against. There's also the Center for International Private Enterprise. There's also the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs and the International Republican Institute. Remember Daniel Twinning bragging about how they overthrew the government in Malaysia, installed a puppet regime, and how the first thing they did was cancel infrastructure projects with China. We remember that video very clearly. So there's also Freedom House. Freedom House is also a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy. They're the ones that come up with this bogus map every year about which countries are free in green and which ones are not. And when you see this map, it's like almost everyone is not free according to Freedom House. When you think everyone else is wrong, maybe you're the one that's wrong. Angela, you got anything on Freedom House? Real quick, I just want to show that NED directly funds Freedom House. They're listed right here.
Just not mine. I mean, just lately in Taiwan, you have two entities, IRI and NDI. They just opened an office in Taiwan. So it gives you, this is an advanced indicator of what Taiwan's democracy is going to be. I mean, it's been hijacked. There's been meddling in Taiwan for a long time, and now this is only the tip of the iceberg. So it's not only NED, but they're coming like in full force. They're expelling, they're shutting down like pro-China voices in Taiwan, and they're coming in with the huge propaganda apparatus from the US. So that's the hijacking of the democracy, and we've seen it all around. We've seen it in Ukraine. In Ukraine now, Ukraine has a deep history with Russia. Now you have all pro-Russian voices that are out. And now you have only one version, and that's the hijacking of democracy. So what happens is that some people, they might start taking money at the beginning, and then they become puppets, and it gets completely hijacked. And we've seen it, we've seen people, the Dalai Lama did the same. He took money from the CIA. Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma, in Myanmar, did the same. She took money. The day you take money from them, it's over. It's over. You're not working for your country. You're working for the US.
I think it's really important to point out that Aung San Suu Kyi and her opposition party, the National League for Democracy, it had a couple of different incarnations, and one of them was actually based 4 years outside of Washington, D.C. So it is literally a puppet regime. And when Aung San Suu Kyi was ousted in February of this year, she had white guys running around, running everything for her. That was who was actually running the government before the military stepped in. It's people could say whatever they want about Myanmar's military, but it is their obligation to intervene if the whole government has been hijacked by foreign interests, especially because Myanmar has this history of being a British colony. Now, look at this. This is what the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, another subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy, or perhaps a franchise, and this is the kind of meetings they have with, the UK, the US. It's ridiculous. You have a bunch of white people running your country. That's what's going on. I mean, Taiwan says they're a country, but show me where their sovereignty starts, where Western interference ends, and where their sovereignty as a nation begins. I don't see it. Now, we showed Freedom House being funded by the NED, so people need to understand that it's not just the NED. There's many satellite organizations, and then there's private foundations like Open Society that works hand in hand. George Soros is not doing something separate on his own. He is working in tandem with the National Endowment for Democracy. There's others, Omidyar, Rockefeller, Ford Foundation. They fill in this role when the NED cannot afford to be caught associating with the opposition. Let's go to the board of directors. Now, this is where people say, okay, the NED is U.S. funding. Okay, I admit it is. But it's promoting freedom around the world. What's wrong with that? Well, look at the people who chair it, who direct it, who run it. This is Damon Wilson. Let's start with him first. Right here. Before joining the National Endowment for Democracy, he was at the Atlantic Council. Right here, it says it right here. All of these links will be in the video description below. And I had to use Wayback Machine because Atlantic Council is always moving the link around. It's very hard to find a list of people who fund the Atlantic Council. But let's look at who it is. The British government right here, Facebook, Goldman Sachs, the Rockefeller Foundation. We were just talking about them. Airbus, which in addition to passenger airliners, they make military aircraft. Chevron, big oil. Google, big tech. JP Morgan, Raytheon, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. government fund. So it's all of these big special interests, the worst violators of human rights, the interests driving every single war. This is who funds Atlantic Council. This is what Damon Wilson was involved in. Angela, you want to bring a BP? Let's see, who else? It just goes on and on and on. Again, the Open Society. We were just talking about sources, Open Society. Okay, Taiwan Economic and Cultural Representative Office. Okay, so Angela, you want to add in anything about the Atlantic Council, its funding, and what the implications are for Damon Wilson going from the Atlantic Council over to the NED as president?
Well, it's important to look at who's got the informal power. We don't talk much about this, but you see behind it's all about the funding. You fund, you control. And I think the trend, which is an obvious trend, is that you have the elites. You have the elites like people like Bill Gates. Like funding. Is massive. The funding of Bill Gates in many NGOs. We talk about hundreds of millions every year. And now you have the special interest. The largest corporation and the largest banks, and those ones are becoming more and more visible. So that's the hand behind this. Sometimes we tend to say the US, but we need to look further, saying, well, who's got the informal power in the US? It's not about demonizing the US. It's about demonizing who's controlling really the US, because the US itself has a democracy problem because it's controlled by the special interest. And the special interests don't care about the nation states. The project of George Soros Foundation is to destroy nation states. And so having a world which is controlled by big corporation and the elites, a minority of elites, and the project is about containing the global south always, but only simplifying, saying the US. I think we should go further. And this is a good example here where we see, well, why would all those corporations fund those NGOs, that are working for regime change? We need to ask our question, because once you have a regime change, they are going to work later, and it's going to benefit to those big corporations.
Okay, so I want to show you. So I want to show you how the now president of the National Endowment for Democracy, Damon Wilson. I want to go back to what you said earlier too, Angelo, about what the NED does and what the U.S. does in terms of foreign policy is suppress the global south. I'm going to show you where Damon Wilson says this himself, unambiguously. So this is November 11th, 2020, so not that long ago. An opportunity for transformational leadership by Damon Wilson. There he is. And he's complaining about how Western power is waning and how they need to get their act together. But what I like best is down here. This is how he sees the world. And this is all the Atlantic Council, the NED, the U.S. State Department. This is all they're doing. This is it boiled down to its basics. Adversaries such as China and Russia have gained ground and room to maneuver as the U.S. built rules-based international order has frayed. Allies in Europe and Asia have learned to hedge against a potentially unreliable or ambivalent United States. And this last sentence is key. And developing nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America have become more capable and more confident in pursuing their interests. What is wrong with that? This is a problem that Damon Wilson, the Atlantic Council, the U.S. government, and the corporations behind it, this is the problem that they see. Latin America, Africa, and Asia have become more capable and confident in pursuing their interests. Why? Because they're not supposed to pursue their interests. They're supposed to represent and serve U.S. interests. And that's what the Atlantic Council, the NED, the U.S. government, and its collective foreign policy, that's what it is. It's to force these regions of the planet to serve Washington and Wall Street. How dare they think they can pursue their own interests? How dare they? And this is deeply rooted racism and imperialism that has been practiced for generations in the West. And that's what the Atlantic Council and the NED represent today. And this same guy who wrote this, Damon Wilson, he is now president of the National Endowment for Democracy. So here in Thailand, when Prachatai, ILAW, David Struckfist, and Isan Record, this is what they're getting money to do, to stop Thailand from pursuing its own interests and to shape the country in a way to serve U.S. interests. Angela, this is outrageous. Do you have anything to say about this that Damon Wilson wrote in the Atlantic Council just about a year ago?
I think it's important just to follow maybe one of the key person behind the NED. He's in the council board. His name is Francis Fukuyama. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the US became like, it was unipolar world. So basically no more USSR was, there's no more Cold War, and the US was alone. Then you have this extremely influential person named Francis Fukuyama. He wrote a book called The End of History. What is the concept of the end of history is that, well, you know what, Western style democracy is going to be as good as it gets. And we are going to export that. The concept of Western style democracy is that it's according to the value behind this is that Westerners, they are willing to give up some tangible rights, which are human rights, like housing and so on, for intangible liberties, freedom of speech and so on. And you see, there's a huge clash when it comes to Western values and Asian and the global South. The global South, when you're starving, what does it give me? Can I eat my freedom of expression? No. That doesn't give me shelter, freedom of expression. No, it's easy for a Westerner living, who's living very well because of the oppression of the global South. We are rich because of the global South being poor, because we're extracting all the values from the global South. We've done everything the last 200 years to make sure that they don't get industrialized. And you see, the COP26 is the project behind this is how can we make sure that they are not going to be industrialized, and we don't want them to pollute while we have an accumulation of pollution for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So you see, this is hypocrisy. So it's important to understand, especially Francis Fukuyama, what is the thinking, because he's one of the most influential intellectuals behind the NED.
Yeah, I just real quick, I just want to reiterate the current president of the National Endowment for Democracy thinks Asia, Africa, and Latin America should not be able to pursue their own interests. This is a problem that he has identified in this article that he wrote for the Atlantic Council, and now he's over at the NED as the president. He's right here. He's the president and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy. So what we're doing is we're going through the board of directors and we're looking at each one of these. So the very president of the NED is already has nothing to do with promoting democracy. He is using the concept of promoting democracy as camouflage to suppress what you say is the global South, Africa, Asia, Latin America. This is what he's doing. This is his mission in life. This is all he has ever talked about. Now he's doing it at the NED. Let's go to, let's see. Elliot Abrams. Elliot Abrams is on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy. If someone came to me and said, we have this awesome organization promoting democracy and freedom around the world, and I say, who's on it? And they say, Elliot Abrams, count me out. I will not be on the same board of directors with someone like this. Why? Elliot Abrams, his bio here on the NED is quite sanitized. Let's go to this Guardian article. And remember, we're going to use all Western sources when we talk about this. We're not going to use Russian or Chinese state media. This is the Guardian from the UK. U.S. diplomat convicted over Iran-Contra appointed special envoy for Venezuela. And also at the same time, he was involved in overthrowing the government of Iran at that same time that he was appointed as envoy for Venezuela. Elliot Abrams, who was linked to a failed coup against Chavez, to join Pompeo to urge Security Council to recognize Guaido as head. And Guaido is just this, Juan Guaido is this guy who the U.S. just unilaterally picked out of nowhere and said he was president of Venezuela. He didn't win an election. And he would literally walk around Caracas with a podium, put it down, give a speech, and then run away before the police showed up. It was like a cartoon, but it was for real. And the sanctions that the U.S. are placing on Venezuela to crush their will to resist this and to accept Juan Guaido as their president are real. Angelo, can you speak to this? What Elliot Abrams was involved in doing in Venezuela? What impact is this having on the ordinary person in Venezuela?
Well, you need to keep in mind that as early as 2 years ago, there was an attempt of invasion of Venezuela. Remember, there were Marines that were caught by the militia. Keeping in mind that there's 2 or 3 million people in Venezuela that act as a militia. It's a parallel force that helps the militaries. So here the militia were fishermen. They caught the Marines. And basically the strategy was just, take the beach first. Once you take the beach, you take the village. So probably 100 of Marines came in, and actually they escaped. They escaped because Venezuela is ready. Now you have this person. He was active in the Iran-Contra, affair. This is terrible what the Contra did in Nicaragua. There was a Sandinista, very, very popular government. that actually recently won again the election, and they've been trying for decades to topple the government there. So here the Iran-Contra affair was basically the US was selling arms to Iran, and the profit of selling arms was going to the Contra. So imagine, two things that were illegals. So and those things were done by the CIA, and they were going against the president's order and the Congress order. So it's extremely illegal, and gives you an idea of what is the deep state. It's extremely undemocratic, and we need to differentiate what is formal power, which is the Congress, the Senate, and the president, and informal power, and that's the deep state, and it's extremely anti-democratic.
So again, Elliot Abrams, he's on the board of directors of the NED. He was involved in all of that, but it gets actually even worse than that. So he is a convicted criminal. He's literally a criminal, and he's sitting on the NED's board of directors. And people will say, well, he got a presidential pardon. That just means you're out of trouble for doing your crime. It doesn't mean you didn't do it. The Guardian also says, now read this, Abrams is widely remembered in Central America, but particularly from his time in the Reagan administration, when he tried to whitewash a massacre of 1,000 men, women, and children by U.S.-funded death squads in El Salvador when he was Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights. And when they talk about El Salvadorian death squads, just think of anything that you saw ISIS doing, and it's about around the same level of just horrendous unmitigated violence, just the worst crimes that you could imagine, being the worst things imaginable done to another human being. This is what these U.S.-sponsored death squads were doing in El Salvador, and this is what Elliot Abrams was overseeing. So this is who you're taking money from. If you're taking NED money, we said in the title why it's wrong to take money from the NED, because the people sitting on the board of directors are guilty of the worst crimes against humanity in modern times. Elliot Abrams is a war criminal. He should be in jail for the rest of his life for the things that he did in El Salvador alone, what he was involved in and trying to whitewash, that alone. And this is who you're taking money from. So if you're a Prachatai here in Thailand or iLaw, this is who you're taking money from. David Struckfist, this is who you're taking money from. People like Elliot Abrams. Do you have any information or extra things you want to add about the death squads in South and Central America that people like Elliot Abrams were involved in?
Well, I think I want to suggest a very good book. It's by Galeano. It's the name is The Open Veins of Latin America, and it tells you all the regime change the US has been doing over the last 50 years. I mean, there's probably not a single country in Latin America that hasn't been toppled or there was no meddling of the US. I mean, name it. Allende in Chile was killed in the 70s. He was killed. He was elected. He was a socialist, and he was killed. Who was behind the US? Pinochet regime was the US puppet. The Argentine coup, Brazil coup. It's been over and over. Lula, they toppled Lula, but who was behind this? You had
in Brazil, right?
In Brazil. So it's really important. This is what we're seeing here now in Asia. It's been a reality for the last 50 years in South America, and they're living with that. But the problem is that you see where the US is extremely strong is the soft power. And they can manage through generations, because you see, I mean, the kids, imagine a kid that has been living over, he was 20, and you grow up with this image of the US through Hollywood. And how can you romanticize a CIA agent that is killing people? That people are idealizing that, but in reality, CIA, NED, all those regime change. What is the reality? It is killing people, is destroying nations. Look at Syria, look at Libya, and the problem is that the US managed to romanticize what they are doing. Because this is the whole thing about manufacturing consent. You repeat over and over, we are good, we are, and you appropriate yourself the words. Semantic is important. When you keep on saying freedom, human right, and so on, but on the other side, you are legalizing torture, because the US is one of the very few countries in the world that you can do waterboarding. It's official. You can do that, but it's the country that is saying, well, we want to export democracy and we want other countries to have human rights. What an hypocrisy.
Yeah, and Hollywood is doing on a much wider scale what the NED did with Elliot Abrams's bio here, where they totally leave out that he's a criminal. He is most certainly guilty of war crimes, although there's no chance of justice ever being served against someone like Elliot Abrams because of the impunity, the way the U.S. operates outside the rule of law. And without the rule of law, there is no democracy. So if you exist outside the rule of law, there's no way you're promoting democracy, because that is a prerequisite. Now, that's Elliot Abrams. So we have Damon Wilson saying, how dare the rest of the world pursue their own interests? There's to serve our interests. And now here's Elliot Abrams, who oversaw death squads murdering men, women, and children, a convicted criminal, and who has openly tried to overthrow sovereign countries, Venezuela and Iran just being the two most recent. Let's see who else there is. There's Scott Carpenter. And Scott Carpenter, even in his official bio for the National Endowment for Democracy, let's see, where is it? Let's see, where is it? Right here. His other roles in government include Director of Governance for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq from April 2003 to July 2004. What are they talking about? They're talking about when the U.S. lied about WMDs, invaded Iraq, killed tens of thousands of people, including thousands of their own soldiers. They wiped out the entire Iraqi government. They either killed everyone, arrested everyone, or drove them into exile. And then they had no government. So they just had a bunch of white guys, this provisional government, running around Iraq, running it until they could handpick a proxy regime to run it in their place with Iraqi faces, but still pursuing U.S. interests. So this is what Scott Carpenter was doing. So that, again, another National Endowment for Democracy board member who was directly involved in a legal war, a war of aggression based on deliberate lies, and directly involved in the occupation of another sovereign country. This is the guy who's promoting democracy. This is who people like Prachatai, Ilaw, David Struckfist, this is who they're taking money from. And it's like there's NED-funded organizations in every country. I'm picking on Thailand because I'm based here. And this is what I'm doing. Do you have anything else to say about Scott Carpenter before we move? You talked about Francis Fukuyama. We're gonna get into him in a little more detail. Do you know anything else about Scott Carpenter or anything to say about?
There are quite a few war criminals there. You know, if you dig a little bit, you know, about their positions, what they've done. You know, they were criminals. Just want to add a few things. I mean, just think about, you know, like they wanted to have a democracy in Iraq. How did it go in Iraq? You know, now they have a democracy, and there was a majority in the Congress, the Iraqi Congress, saying, well, we want the Americans to leave Iraq. You know, so how is it going with democracy? You know, you wanted elections in Palestine. The Hamas won. Now, you know, recently, I mean, these days, the UK is actually rebranding the Hamas as a terrorist organization, you know. So if it goes against your own interest, then no, we don't want democracy. You know, you need to be coherent. You know, if you impose a democracy and it goes against your interest, and then you don't want the result, it's just pure hypocrisy.
Yeah, it's imperialism dressed up as promoting democracy. It's very clear. And again, if this was actually promoting democracy, how come everyone on the board of directors are all involved in regime change and meddling and war crimes? Why wouldn't they all be people who are versed in promoting democracy, whatever that even means? Because again, democracy is a process of self-determination. So there's no way you could have a foreign organization promoting self-determination in your own country. It's a contradiction. It's a paradox. Now let's move on to Francis Fukuyama. This guy, in addition to what you were saying, Angelo, I just want to point this out. There's this school of political science in Yangon in Myanmar, and it is completely funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. It is run by Zin Mar Aung, who has her own official webpage on the National Endowment for Democracy's website. This is her, Zin Mar Aung. And they even talk about the School of Political Science right here. And so Francis Fukuyama was one of the guys who came to talk at this school that the NED is funding in Myanmar. And what is the purpose of this school? Is to churn out people who will vote the way the U.S. wants them to vote during elections. So again, the complete hijacking of democracy, not the promotion of democracy. And who is Zin Mar-ang? Why is this so important? Why am I talking about this and Francis Fukuyama talking at her school? Because she is the current Minister of Foreign Affairs of the so-called National Unity Government. This is their official website. And if you scroll down, there she is, Zin Mar-ang, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And if you click on this and you take some time to let it load, they'll even mention that she was an NED fellow. I mean, it's just... What were you saying, Angela? If you had no sovereignty, you had no democracy. Zin Mar-ang is a puppet of the U.S. government. She is a creation of the U.S. government. She would not be a politician in Myanmar if it was not for the U.S. government building her up, building up her school, funding the opposition party that she is a member of, the National League for Democracy, and now the National Unity Government, which is a fake parallel government that no one recognizes. There would be no NUG without the U.S. constantly backing it. The only prospect they have of being recognized is through a process led by the U.S. State Department. And the U.S. State Department talks with her on a daily basis, in Mar-ang, on a regular basis, not a daily basis, regular basis. If you follow the Deputy Secretary of State, she will post on Twitter pictures of her video conferencing with Zin Mar-ang. Angelo, anything you want to add about Francis Fukuyama?
Well, just this government in exile, it's nothing new. We've seen it. We've seen many governments in exile that are actually puppet regime outside, just like fake. It's completely fake. There's absolutely no recognition. We saw Balochistan, movement, in exile in the UK. Dalai Lama, it's the same. He's not representative of the Tibetans. Juan Guaido was the same. And actually, NUG, when it comes to Myanmar, it's actually, they reinstated the government in exile they had in the 80s. So you have a government in exile that is run from Washington. And they want that government in exile to be representative of the interest of Myanmar people. It's just ridiculous, And I think it's, again, it's important for us just to explain to people in the region. There's a lag time. It's not obvious. 20 years ago, it would be very difficult. When they created NED, it would be very difficult to really see what was behind this. And now, probably because of internet, the information is flowing more. Now we have the tools now to expose what is really behind this. And it's pure destruction. And it's important for people to understand. I mean, you and I, we've had you in Thailand and me in Hong Kong. We had first-hand experience of what it is.
Yes.
People, for a lot of people, it's intangible when they see those regime change. Like, oh, well, people are fighting and so on. No. It's really important that those are evil movements. It's extremely evil. And what is behind this is destruction, and it's extremely mature. It's like zombies. I call them zombies. They call slogans. And they carry like Western flags. When you go to those protests, if you were to go in 2019 in Hong Kong, you had British flags, American flags, and they were working against their own interest. And it's extremely shameful. What I'm saying is that the global south, Thailand and Chinese people, well, you can decide for your own fate. We need to break the cycle of humiliation. Because if you want to be human, if you really believe in democracy, well, democracy happens at the level of the UN, and it happens within the country without meddling. That's the real democracy. People should decide for their own fate. Why would you accept money from NED? And I think it's important to keep on repeating over and over. Whoever is taking NED money, well, you are a foreign agent. You are actually a CIA agent, and you are working against your country's interest. Full stop.
Absolutely. And Zin Mar-ang, the reason I want to point this out in her connection with Francis Fukuyama, I'm hosting a board of director member of the NED at her school, which is funded by the NED. At first, it's just a ridiculous, cartoonish conflict of interest. And number two, this is what they mean by promoting democracy. installing an opposition that they built up into power. That's not promoting democracy. Democracy is where people are deciding for themselves. It would be difficult, if not impossible, for a country to actually somehow help promote that in another country. But I'm pointing out that that is clearly not what the NED is doing. They're not objectively building up the capacity for Myanmar to decide its own fate, which, again, it's paradoxical at face value, but that's clearly not what they're doing. Zin Mar Aung was part of the opposition, and the NED was building her and her party up to get them into power, and that's all they were doing. So this is regime change. This is not promoting democracy at all. It's completely separate. They're just saying that as camouflage. So that's Francis Fukuyama right here, and that was an example of him directly involved in meddling in Myanmar's internal political affairs. And again, the U.S. would never tolerate someone from another country doing this to them in the U.S. It would never be allowed. Who's next? Anne Applebaum. And I picked her. I mean, we could do this for every single board of director member, but I picked her because of the immense conflict of interest here. She was at the Washington Post. She was on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy, and she's also an advisor of NED-funded fronts. So here they talk about her being at the Washington Post. Here's the gray zone talking about Coda Story. Coda Story is funded by the NED. They've lied about being funded by the NED, but it's ridiculous because even on the NED's own website, they talk about Coda Story and how they fund it. It's just ridiculous. And here, NED grantees win European Press Prize. If you use Wayback Machine, you will find this Coda Story. It's right there. And she was on the board of advisors of Coda Story. She's right there. So do you see how this is a huge conflict of interest? Do you see why the Washington Post will lie about regime change in, say, someplace like Thailand? It's because the people at the Washington Post are also literally the same people at the National Endowment for Democracy funding regime change and benefiting from it. This is a huge conflict of interest. So again, no ethics at all. And this is who people are taking money from when they take NED money. Angela, you have anything else to say about Anne Applebaum? You mean she's notorious for spreading regime change propaganda? Notorious.
Yeah, just Coda Story. Can you just confirm? They were actually making up stories about pro-China, pro-Russia influencers. Like content creators. That supposedly they were paid by foreign powers, Russia or China. Is it what was Coda Story about, right?
Yeah, that's what they were doing. They would do like whole interviews. They would interview you for like 2 hours, and then they'll like put one sentence. Yeah, he's funded by Beijing. So things like that, very childish, crass propaganda, and funded by the NED. The Atlantic Council does the exact same thing. They've got Bellingcat and like all of these splinter organizations that they just fund to accuse people of being Russian or Chinese agents. When in reality, I mean, like, what do we do? What would the Chinese or Russian government be paying me to do? To read the NED's official website to people? It makes no sense. But that's what they do because they're trying to undermine people's credibility so that they can continue on dictating to the rest of the world. Again, promoting democracy or dictating to the rest of the world. Very, very clear what they're trying to do. Who else is there? They don't have much to say about Victoria Nuland. They just got her face there and her name. She was an ambassador. She was affiliated with the NED. So we remember this. Leaked audio reveals embarrassing U.S. exchange on Ukraine European Union. This was all about the 2013-2014 U.S.-backed regime change in Ukraine. They overthrew an elected government. There was no election that put those people into power. They violently overthrew the government. The U.S. was directly involved. They had U.S. senators. They had Victoria Nuland in Kiev on stage with the protesters, openly supporting them. And then I still have people to this day saying the U.S. didn't support them. That didn't happen. Well, we have these videos. The links are in the video description below. You could watch them. We're not going to play them now. And this is about Victoria Nuland supporting the Ukrainian opposition, which were Mostly neo-Nazis. Angela, you want to talk about that
Well,
a little bit?
it's embarrassing. There were like movements, neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine. One of them is the Azov Battalion, and they were helping. They were the one actually helping toppling the government, democratically elected government in Maidan in 2014. So it's extremely embarrassing. So now where you have laws that they want you to condemn like a Nazi movement around the world at the UN. The only countries that actually are against those laws are Ukraine, just a coincidence, and the US. So you see, how is it helping democracy by having like neo-Nazi movement? I mean, they're extremely they're very open about this.
Yeah.
They worship Bandera. Bandera is their hero that actually collaborated with the Nazi, in the World War II. So you see, those are inconvenient truth, and we need to expose that. What is behind the government, the present government in Ukraine? Why they're holding into power is because they have support from neo-Nazis.
Yeah, let me just go over this real quick. So this is the Wikipedia. Wikipedia tries to paint U.S. collaborators in the most flattering light possible, but Stepan Bandera is a Nazi collaborator, and there really is no graceful way to portray that. And the organization that he was a part of, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, this was their flag. They are Nazi collaborators. If you go down to Jews, let's see, what is his opinion on Jews? Completely in step with Adolf Hitler. Bandera was an anti-Semite and Nazi collaborator, full stop. And this is who the current leadership of Ukraine and the people who support it, this is who their hero is, Stepan Bandera. It's outrageous. And again, I want to show people this flag, this red and black flag. Now let's look at this BBC story, Ukraine Revolution and the far right. This is them flying the Nazi collaborator flag. This three-finger salute here on this flag, this is Svoboda. This is a far right-wing neo-Nazi organization. And if you go through this, the BBC, this is after it already happened. The neo-Nazis took over because in the beginning they said that's Russian propaganda. They're not neo-Nazis. They're not. That's just Russian propaganda. But then here's the BBC admitting, okay, yeah, maybe it was true. Maybe they are neo-Nazis. And if you come all the way down to the bottom, this is incredible. This is the leader of Svoboda. Down here, he says, where is it? Right here. He's saying that world Jewry was taking over Ukraine and would commit genocide against Ukrainians. I mean, this is literally like what Adolf Hitler was talking about in Mein Kampf. And then this is how BBC ends this article. Svoboda are not violent fascists and may change with time, even though he said this and he never took it back over years and years. And he's saying we just have to watch them very, very closely. But of course, they're not going to. They're going to do what the West does all the time with opposition they support. They will whitewash their crimes, and they will blame others for whatever it is that they did, which, in Ukraine, they're always blaming Russia. And so, again, literal neo-Nazis. This is who the U.S. was backing in Ukraine. This is who, here, Victoria Nuland was backing. Hold on a second. McCain is a U.S. senator at the time. Kiev. Let's see the pictures of him in Kiev. Who was he standing on stage with? Oh, it's the guy who says Jews are trying to take over the world. That's who he was literally standing on stage with. This is who he was. This is who he was supporting in Kiev during the U.S.-backed regime change operation. Angela, you got anything to add? It's so ridiculous, but that's the power of the Western media. You could be putting Nazis into power, literal like Hail Hitler Nazis into power, and they'll still pretend like this is democracy. This is what the NED was doing in Ukraine. Angelo?
Well, related to Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine 2014, what they did in Hong Kong was actually they would put everyday movies around Hong Kong, the propaganda movies, Winter on Fire. And basically they would indoctrinate kids by watching those movies, celebrating all those rioters that destroy completely Ukraine. And look at what Ukraine is today. We're talking about a partnership, they're brothers. You have 30% of Ukrainians that are Russian descended. they completely cut the ties with Russia. For what? For fake friends that actually doesn't care about Ukraine. Ukraine is not going to get like transit fee of gas. They were almost like so much connected with Russia, and now they cut the ties. They even actually erasing Russian heritage. That they and talking about genocide, they accusing China of genocide. The real genocide, cultural genocide, is happening right now in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Russian media are expelled. And the
Yeah.
language, it's just a matter of time. If this government holds on, this puppet government holds on, you won't have any more Russian heritage. They are going to erase it.
And what people don't understand about Ukraine before U.S.-backed regime change in 2014 was it was enjoying the best of both worlds. It had a positive relationship with both Russia and the EU, and it picked and chose what it wanted and what it didn't want. And so they were benefiting both ways, and they were enjoying a degree of autonomy in the process. And the U.S. said, no, that's unacceptable. You're going to cut all of your ties off with Russia, and you are going to jump headfirst into NATO and the EU. And he said no. And so they had neo-Nazis take over and run. And this is the problem the U.S. has everywhere it goes and tries to, stir up trouble. Only the absolute worst in any given society is going to sell out to the NED and be either foolish enough or just atrocious enough to collaborate with the NED, to collaborate with foreigners against their own country. Only the absolute worst in every given country. The U.S. builds this huge opposition in any given country of these absolutely horrible people. What do you do with people that are this disconnected from reality and disconnected from their actual best interests? What are they capable of doing? So the neo-Nazis just completely ran Ukraine into the ground. The opposition in Syria or Libya, they're just completely hopeless. They cannot run anything on their own. They run everything directly into the ground. Could you imagine what would have happened if the opposition in Hong Kong prevailed? What would have happened to Hong Kong? And I ask people who are taking money from the NED, please give me an example of a country the NED sponsored the opposition in, and they came to power. How did that turn out for that country? They can't name a single success story because there are none. Angelo, can you think of any success stories?
There's none. I think it's important. I want to add something. What can be done against foreign meddling, NED, those old fake NGOs that are going to destabilize countries, and ultimately they're going against the country's democracy. I think it's really important to look at, and I think China is a very good example. What did China do? It's about information game. You need to get your act together when it comes to your internal media. You need a stable media, and no foreign meddling. Then you need to have a very strong national security law. If in Asia, they're really far from that. It's unacceptable that you have foreign agents running around and just like meddling, coaching for colored revolution. And then it's really important that they need to have their own ecosystem when it comes to technology, like social media. When you have Twitter, Facebook, YouTube that are actually a monopoly on information, and you see how they're tightening up, that is the real game. And they need to get this, to really understand what is behind this. And they need to have their own ecosystem, protect their own ecosystem. And this is why China did it really well. I think that China learned extremely well since 1989. You see, Tiananmen Square protest, it was US backed, and was the first, it was an attempt to topple the government back then. And they managed extremely well just to be powerful and to protect their own sovereignty. And so many countries need to get those foundation, and foundation is strong national security law.
Yes, I agree absolutely. This is really important. There's actually more people on the board of directors that we were going to go through, but we're a little over time. I still want to do questions and answers, but I think this is a good to close our presentation here. What to do about the National Endowment for Democracy? And you're absolutely right. You see a lot of the U.S.-backed Thai protesters saying we need to follow the Hong Kong model to overthrow the Thai government. And my response to that always is Thailand should follow the Beijing model on how they put an end to that. And you're absolutely right. Social media is how you control information space. If you have a country You have an army protecting your land borders, a navy protecting your shores. You have an air force protecting your airspace, but you have a foreign US-based social media company utterly controlling your information space in the 21st century. If you are not protecting your information space, if you don't control it, you are not protecting your country at all. You could have all the tanks in the world. If the US can come in through your social media and they can poison everyone against their own country, who's going to man those tanks? Who's going to fly the fighter planes to defend your airspace? They could take your whole society, divide it, turn it against itself through information space. Information space is another sovereign domain that every nation needs to protect. You're right, China does that. They have their own social media platforms, Western platforms that have been abused in China. They have been banned. That's why they're banned, because they were stirring up literal terrorism where people were being killed using Facebook and Twitter. So every other country needs to do that. And countries that feel like they're incapable of doing that on their own, well, you buy tanks from China, you buy helicopters from Russia. Why not buy a platform from one of these countries that successfully defend their information space? Import that just like you import other means of defending your sovereign domains. Really good point, Angelo. And I just wanted to say it again. That's how important I think it is. Let's see. So yeah, the national security law. I mean, transparency. We were talking before the show how all of these NED-funded organizations say in Russia before they pass their NGO law, or here in Thailand because there's an NGO law coming, they're kicking and screaming. When you look at the NGO law, it's, hey, just post who funds you on your website so people know. You know, like Project Thai does not post who funds them in Thai, only in English, and only in 2011, one time because I pressured them to do it. People don't know that they're getting funded by the US government. Why are you so against transparency? Because you have something to hide. You know it's wrong. So absolutely, national security, control your information space. Let's do anything else, Angelo?
No, I think maybe we can look at the question. If there's any questions, maybe we can answer.
Okay.
Just scroll there.
So Ray BC asked a question that's kind of scrolled up a little bit. He said, you know, there's always this argument that the country is a horrible dictatorship and the opposition has no way of fighting back. They need the NED to come in and help them. What do you say to people that make that argument? And the answer is just like what we just did today. You show that the people guilty of the worst crimes against humanity in the 21st century are sitting on the board of directors of the NED. They're not interested in helping you. They're interested in taking whatever problem that you have in your country and compounding it by a factor of 10 at least. They are going to gut and destroy your country. This is what they have done over and over again. They're not here to help. So if you need external help, find it from somewhere else. The NED, Open Society, USAID, the equivalent in Germany or the UK, this is not where you go to get help. This is how you cut your throat and bleed out your country. Any other let's see, any other questions? And Angela, if you have anything you want to add to that, please.
Yes, again, here we're not saying that there's not a single country around the world that is perfect. You know, it's a utopia to have a country that is perfect, that has found its own system. You know, even there's corruption. There are problems everywhere. You know, we're not saying that Russia, China is perfect. You know, they're trying to go into the right direction, but this is their own destiny. That is their own choice. You know, who am I again? You know, it's really important that when you look at the imperialistic project, it's about imposing value. You know, so there's a sense of superiority. You have the white guy that is going to China and say, well, you know what, I have the solution. I know you have 2,000 years of history, but I'm into an experimental system which is called Western style democracy, and I want to impose it on you. Well, you know what? Take the example of China, 2,000 years of history. The CPC system, what they're applying into China is actually a continuation of what they've been doing for 2,000 years. It's a meritocracy system, and it's extremely representative. And actually, you know what? Chinese love it. So who am I, white guy, you know, from the US or wherever, and who wants to go and there teach them? It's the same. It's modern imperialism. You know, the only difference, more subtle. You know, imperialism used to be like boots on the ground and controlling people. Now it's more subtle. You know, it's social media, it's influencing people, it's turning people against each other, creating chaos. You know, ultimately, we are for democracy. We are for whatever the people want as a system. But it needs to be from their own initiative.
Absolutely.
Giving you an example, Taiwan, this movement for Taiwan independence. The question is this idea coming from Taiwanese, or is this an idea that is pushed into Taiwanese? That is a question. So you see, when you control the information, then you control the mind of people.
Yeah. I put on the screen, as you were saying, that the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, again, it is an appendage of the National Endowment for Democracy. It represents U.S. interests in Taiwan, and it's through the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy and other affiliated organizations and political parties that this otherwise completely absurd notion of Taiwan independence comes from. Because as we show every single time, and I have this conversation with people who think they're pro-independence, the economy, look at where Taiwan, all of their exports go to mainland. Overwhelming majority, its economy is not set up like an independent country. It is set up like a province of China, because it is a province of China. And this is not in their best interest to declare independence. China, the mainland, would not have to invade Taiwan. All they have to do is stop taking the exports from Taiwan. The whole economy will collapse. And there is no one who can pick up the slack there, not in any reasonable way or time frame. And so it is just completely insane. And it's what the U.S. does to every single client regime around the world, setting it up for failure. It's sending it off of a cliff to spite another much larger rival the U.S. has. In this case, mainland China. In Ukraine's case, the Russian Federation. This is what they do. They are going to destroy your country. They're not there to help. Let's see. Is there other questions here?
I'd like to add just Brian. Just
go ahead.
You know that National Endowment for Democracy has it's the replica in Europe and in Taiwan. So Europe, there is a European Foundation for Democracy. The same idea. There's meddling. It's not as aggressive as National Endowment for Democracy, but they're starting. So you see this movement. It's a global movement, and Europe is not innocent. When it comes to Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, remember, they financed the memorial of victim of communists, who's funding Adrian Zenz, and who's the main person behind the fake news on Xinjiang. Every report, they all linked to Adrian Zenz. So you see, it's all about following the money. So if I want to advise people, what we are doing is not rocket science. It's follow the money. So you can do on your own. Whenever you have someone coming out and opposing the current government and so on, just follow the money. Just a few clicks. Who's behind that? Who's financing them? And follow. It's always there. It's not rocket science what Brian and we're doing.
Yeah, I want to build on something you also just said. The idea that the West sets the standards on human rights and democracy and self-determination, this is just at face value. It's so racist. It's the notion that white people know best for everyone else on Earth. It is so insulting to everyone else on Earth. It's also insulting to people in the West, because even from one Western country to another, they may superficially all look the same, but they're not. They have their own unique way, tradition and culture, and they don't want necessarily what's going on in, say, the US or another country in Europe, for example. Everyone has a right to define their system their own way, based on their own sensitivities and cultural and historical conditions. There is no one size fits all. The West does not get to decide for everyone else. And it's so contradictory toward the notion of democracy that there is one standard that should be forced on everyone else. That's not democracy. That's not deciding for yourself. That is a dictatorship, a global dictatorship. That is what imperialism is. And imperialism is apex injustice. There's no form of injustice greater than imperialism, because it's global in scale. Nothing could be possibly bigger than that. So I think that's a really good point you brought up there, Angelo. The notion that the West sets the standard is ridiculous, including the notion of how the U.S. determines free speech, and that's something that every other country should follow. No, it's not. No, it isn't. As a matter of fact, I think, speaking as an American, America's current definition of free speech is extremely flawed. It allows for people to just abuse each other. What right do you have to abuse other people? And under U.S. free speech laws, you're allowed to just completely abuse other people. In school, for example, bullying. I mean, when you insult or mock someone, this is abuse. It's bullying, and the components of bullying. People kill themselves over that. That's not innocent. You don't have a right to abuse other people. So the U.S. will dictate to Thailand and say, no, bullying and mockery and insulting, that's all free speech. Says who? Says white people on the other side of the world. Let Thai people figure out what they want to consider free speech and what isn't. And Angela, you know this. You're in Europe. You're in Europe. There are red lines in different European countries of what you can and cannot say. And just for saying something, making sounds with your mouth, you can go to jail for crossing those red lines. So why does the West get to decide that, but no one else does? It just seems so unfair and at face value racist. Let me try to see if there's another question here. Do you see any? Oh, should China lift its Great Firewall? I feel like it will bring a whole new wave of ultra-nationalists that attack these deranged China bashers like Laoway 86 and Serpent. No, I don't think that they should. The Great Firewall in China is China protecting its information space. It's just like, should China ground all of its warplanes and not defend its airspace? No, that should definitely stay out. People like Matthew Tai and Winston Searle, they're loud, they're obnoxious. The way you can hurt them most is challenge them to a debate, and they'll disappear. Trust me, because they've disappeared. They don't bother me anymore. Angela, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. I think you made some really good points there. Well, firewall, again, I think we need to be, imagine if China was completely open, and we need to be really careful. You know, China could be much more aggressive if it was not for the CPC, which is very rational. You have like extremely rational people that are, managing the country, and you see the result of 40 years of expansion, and prosperity in China. It could be extremely China if it was open. If it was Western style democracy, it would be extremely chaotic. And this is what the West want. Look at India's democracy. How is it going with India? How is it going? How is it going with the Muslim minority in India? How is it going in terms of prosperity? I'm talking about, go to India and see the poverty. Look at infrastructure. Well, you see what? Well, this is why, you have 160 million Chinese, they go abroad every year. They all come back to China. Why? Because they're happy with their life in China. They got prosperity. They got human rights. They're happy with that. You know what? Why there's no refugees? Why there's no Xinjiang refugees, Uyghur refugees abroad, and Chinese refugees abroad? Because they're happy. The only few refugees you have abroad are, Hong Kong agents that were paid by NED. They had to escape because they had to face law.
Yeah, and Xinjiang, all the people you see overseas complaining about, a genocide in Xinjiang, they're all openly separatists. They fly the East Turkestan separatist flag, the light sky blue and white flag of East Turkestan, which does not exist. This is what they want to transform Xinjiang into. So again, they're malcontents. They're going to say whatever they need to say to advance their own political agenda, including just completely lying. And again, Angela, just like you said, there's no huge way. Like if the conflict in Syria, like that is definitely happening. And there are definitely tons of Syrians who left, even people who support the government, but they just cannot find a place safe to live at the time. For the time being inside Syria. They're all over. They've been scattered all over, millions of them. That's what you would actually see coming out of Xinjiang. If anything the West was saying was even half true. It's not even true at all. None of it. I wanted to say one last thing. If you spot one last question, maybe we'll do one last question, Angela. I just want to talk about this Summit for Democracy. I just want to point out how completely ridiculous the Summit for Democracy is. This is the United States making a list of nations it has unilaterally decided are democratic. And of course, if you weren't invited, you're undemocratic. The U.S. is deciding this on their own. There was no vote. There was no forum to decide anything. The agenda has been unilaterally decided by the U.S. State Department. And think about this: there are opposition people here in Thailand saying, "See, Thailand's a terrible country. They weren't invited to Joe Biden's Summit for Democracy." Joe Biden just got done ordering a drone strike in Afghanistan that wiped out an entire family, including 7 children. The U.S. investigated it, found that they broke no law, slaughtering an entire family on the other side of the planet. And the investigator said it was an honest mistake. This is who's putting this Summit for Democracy together. So words versus actions. Actions speak louder than words. The United States is in no position to unilaterally declare a Summit for Democracy and then say those not invited, they're not democratic, they're the problem. No, it's more posturing, it's more window dressing for a country and a global agenda, a foreign policy that is deeply troubled, deeply unjust, if not the most unjust thing taking place right now in current time. Angela, you got anything else? Did you see any questions?
No, I think it's all good. I think we had a good exchange. Again, it's really important if I can tell people, just stay informed, question things, look at the funding. It's really important. It's not white and black. There's a project here. The project is we are entering into Cold War. There's a potential hot war. It's important to just to question that all the demonization and what the Western media want to portray. They want what they're doing is what Noam Chomsky called manufacturing consent. This is the stage before war, potential war, and we need to condemn, to go against that, because nobody's going to win there. And it's the average citizen is going to lose. Who's going to win is maybe the elites. Those are the elites, but those elites are not going to send their kids to war. We are going to be the ones suffering. I mean, why repeating things? We repeating the same mistake. And important people need to learn about history. Really look into facts. If you learn about World War I, and World War II, maybe you don't want to repeat the same mistakes.
Absolutely. And just because people probably don't believe me that the U.S. said it was an honest mistake, this is from the BBC, who would try in any way possible to paint the U.S. in the most flattering light possible. Deadly U.S. drone strike in Kabul did not break law, Pentagon says. And down here's the U.S. Air Force Inspector Lieutenant General. It was an honest mistake. Oops, we just killed a whole family. And by the way, let me explain about U.S. drone warfare. Daniel Hale is rotting in jail right now because years ago, like over 10 years ago, I think it was, he exposed how U.S. drone warfare, 90% or more of the people killed are innocent civilians because it's an ineffective way to mass murder people. And so the U.S. knew about this. They did nothing about it. All they did was throw the whistleblower in jail who revealed this information. And as you can see, they continued doing it up to present day, where they're wiping out entire families. And then the audacity to say it was an honest mistake when they know that drone warfare is this inaccurate and this likely to cause collateral damage, murdering innocent people, basically. It's just outrageous. It's sickening. This is why we do this on a weekly basis. This is why we take time out of our lives to present this to the public. Angela, I want to thank you very much for joining me again. Everyone who showed up for the live show, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I do read through the comments as we're doing the show. I really appreciate the constructive feedback. Check out the video description for all the links and for ways you can follow Angelo on social media. And until next week, bye for now.